Good evening. I'm Ed Graff, Superintendent of Minneapolis Public Schools. It's my honor to welcome you to this important community discussion around race, equity, and inclusion. I'm sorry I couldn't join you this evening as I'm attending a graduation ceremony at one of our high schools. I want to commend you for having this important discussion. At NPS, we believe that the work of social emotional learning and equity are clearly connected. Through our work, we believe we can create environments that are safe, welcoming, and conducive to learning for all of our students. That is our goal and responsibility. I'm encouraged by the possibilities of what this will mean for our students today and for our students in the future. When I listen to the voices of our students, I often note that they understand equity as opposed to equality in a way that we can all learn from. I believe that's the work we need to do. No matter if we're in education or healthcare or business, we need to understand the lens, the lived experiences that contribute to our thoughts and behavior in every situation. Minneapolis Public Schools wants to do better by a diverse student body, and we're committed to doing better. As you examine the role of race, equity, and inclusion in your neighborhood, I encourage you to learn from and keep the focus on our community's youth and their voices. Thank you again for your work in these important areas, and have a great meeting.
First, I'm going to start by just going back to where we were in the fall and the amazing celebration we had of the schools pairing, and that was the Hale-Field pairing, the historical pairing. We had a great discussion and just an amazing turnout. We had some what's affectionately been called now the field moms that really were instrumental in that pairing. And so this is really a continuation, and we hope to continue these kind of discussions. We have safe places for people to come and talk about different things that are happening in our neighborhood. We know that that was an amazing historical endeavor, and we also know that we're still facing some of those same challenges today, so we need to keep the discussions going. So thank you again for being here today. We want to just take a few minutes to acknowledge some of the educators that are here tonight, but I'd also like to acknowledge who made this night possible. We have the Field Regina Northrop Education Committee, the Hale Welcoming Equity Committee, Hale and Field Schools, the PTA, panelists Andrea Jenkins, who's with us tonight, Candace Logan, and hopefully Maya Norfield will be joining us here shortly, as well as Superintendent Ed Graff. And then we also have the Field Avid students have put together these amazing historical boards, so please take some time to look at that too, and it will tell you more about the Southside history. So I'd like to just take a minute to introduce our panelists that are here with us tonight. First we have Candace Logan, and she's the District Manager of Equity and Integration at Minneapolis Public Schools. And I think, Candace, you've been with the district how many years, did you say? You can talk, and it should be on, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'm not used to talking to microphones. I've been in Minneapolis since 2011, and in this current position since December of 2017.
Okay, so new in your position, yeah. And we have the Honorable Andrea Jenkins here tonight. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us. She's this City Council Vice President of the Minneapolis City Council of Ward 8. So thank you for being here tonight. So Candace, we'll get started with you, and we as a team have talked about some of the things that we want to ask you about, since you're here kind of representing the district and have some knowledge about some of these discussions that you all are having there as a team around these issues. And so we've got kind of two questions. The first part of the question would be that we've seen programs that once contributed to racial diversity and integration, such as the Lindell Community School busing program that supported Somali families in particular. We're seeing some of those programs get cut back, and we all know all the challenges the district's facing with the budgets. So this leaves us wondering, given the budget cuts, what are some of the strategies and things that you are looking at the district to address some of the integration and diversity needs of our schools?
Well, if I can start, part of my position is integration. And so as a district, Minneapolis Public Schools has 21 racially identifiable schools, which means that the majority of the students attending that particular school are from a protected class And the state Minnesota Department of Education identifies protected class as, specifically, we would look at our African American students, we would look at our Asian American students. And so if you look, I could throw out a school's name like Hall Elementary or Lucy Laney, and people who are familiar with Minneapolis know that the demographics of that school is predominantly brown. And so we have 21 of those schools in our district, and so we receive integration dollars from the state of Minnesota to, depending on what the challenge is in that building, to address programming so that we boost student achievement. And so with that, we spend, I think we get a good 15 million in integration dollars from the state. Some of that programming, some of that money goes directly to schools, and some of it goes towards programming like AVID. So there may be students at Field who are taking AVID classes or in AVID classes, and some of the integration dollars go to that, because one of the goals is to increase the number of students of color in advanced courses, increase proficiency on the Minnesota Comprehensive or the state test, as well as increase graduation rates for our students of color. Within that 15 million, we spend about $4.6 million on transportation throughout the district. One of the challenges with that is the integration is happening one way. So we are taking Black and brown children from their neighborhoods and busing them across the city, which on one hand, as a parent, you may be very happy with that because there may be programming that's offered at that site that isn't offered at your neighborhood school, but we also know that comes at a cost. So you have children, as a parent of a 10-year-old, I know that when he's going to a school where the majority of the students don't look like him, there is a cost that I'm going to pay as a parent, that he's going to pay. So there's a certain amount of affirmation that is not going to happen every day. However, there's also the other, on the other end of the continuum, he can go to a school where everyone looks like him, which is not bad. But if we're talking about integration, it's often, the burden often is on Black and brown children to leave their neighborhoods. So my question is, why can't we, if we're really talking about integration, why couldn't we have buses of white students going to Nellie Stone, going to Lindale, I mean not Lindale, I'm sorry, going to Nellie Stone, going to Lucy Laney? And I think about that because there's also implications when a child goes to a school. And so I just wanted to touch on that because there can be this perception that we're not spending enough money on busing, but $4.6 million on busing is being spent. And again, we're talking about moving kids from their neighborhood across the city. So what does that say about what their neighborhood school? So, and I can't answer directly. I would, if I needed to get, because some of that, the busing around Lindale was before my time. And so could I tag off to you? Can I tag off to you? You think I got it? So let me just point out, this right here, this man right here is my boss.
Oh, okay. Hi.
So I did, right?
Hi.
So I asked him if I need to, can I tag you in? So,
Hey, we appreciate that.
Yeah. So when it comes to the busing with Lindale, specifically around that, we're looking at also how can we boost, if we're looking at $4.6 million, we're also not necessarily moving our achievement in a huge way. So there's some questions about that. We are getting ready to undergo a district-wide assessment where we'll be examining not only what we mean or what we believe about what does it mean to be a graduate of Minneapolis Public Schools, but also looking at our programming, looking at where we're putting our dollars. Is it giving us the impact that we want? And because I have I have the responsibility and also the privilege to manage that $15 million, we're also looking at, is the money that we're putting in these different programming meeting the needs of the students that it's intended for? So we could look at some of the programs that money is going towards, but we need to know that it's impacting the protected students that the state has identified, and that we're not continuing to create this discrepancy across the district.
Yeah, well, thank you for talking about the assessment, because that was going to be one of my follow-up questions is, well, how do you do that process when it comes to the busing and making those decisions? So it sounds like it's across the district, different departments working on that assessment. Do you bring in outside people to partner with you, or how do you do that?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
that's
you.
okay.
We have TeamWorks. It's an outside agency that's coming in, and so they are examining our programs. They're looking at where we are spending our dollars. If we're saying we're spending $4.6 million on busing, is it getting us the results that we want? Truth be told, we do a very good job of educating white students in Minneapolis. When we're looking at parents that are leaving, it's not our white families that are leaving MPS.
Mm-hmm.
They may be leaving, but they're not leaving in the same number as our black and brown families. So again, as a person that is supporting the work of equity and integration, part of my job is asking those questions. Like, why is it that we do a really good job of educating our white students and our families are pretty happy, and yet we have a large number of black and brown families that are leaving, and what is it about what's happening in the district that is causing them to leave and go elsewhere?
Can you just talk about, maybe give us one more program that you have? You mentioned Avid and transportation, or maybe another program that you've seen elsewhere that's effective?
There's two. One, we have a program called Learning Works at Blake, and we're having our Minneapolis public school students from some of our schools in integrated learning opportunities with students from Blake. That's another one of the things that we need to talk, what does that look like when we're saying it's more than just busing students across the city? It's, are we sitting together, learning together? Because you could bus a student across the city and they could be one of 2 brown children in the classroom. But if we're talking about an integrated learning opportunity, how are we making those opportunities afforded to children? That's one. And another one that I'm excited about into the next school year is Dare to Be Real. And it's a program that is geared towards our students that helps them, they already have a voice. It creates the conditions where they're able to use their voice. So they look at what does social justice mean? What does it mean to be a social justice minded person? What does it mean to be a racial equity minded person? Because we can ask them what they want and what they need, and they'll tell us. And so Dare to Be Real helps to give students that platform to talk about what's important to them, to make moves in their school. We just had a YPE, or Youth Participatory Evaluation Summit, where we had students from different schools, middle and high school, come together and share their learnings for the year. So in one building, there were a group of middle school students that were asking, why don't we have more teachers of color in our district? And they even created a map of Minneapolis public schools. And with their social studies teacher? With their social studies teacher, they learned about the dot mapping and how the bigger the dot, the more concentrated that particular number. And so they shared the map, and then they showed the dots of where teachers of color are located, and they were looking at the certain parts of the city where the dots are extremely small, and then the dots for white teachers is extremely large. So that was one of their topics that they were looking at and asking their classmates, is it important for you to have a teacher of color? And if so, why? Or is it important for you to have a teacher that you identify with? It could be in terms of language, it could be in terms of lifestyle, family structure. Is that important to you? And so then they were able to present that to their classmates or colleagues across the district. Nice. And another group of students were looking at the school to prison pipeline.
So how do you get that? And so I'm a marketer. So how do you communicate some of those great things that are you doing? Because I know, like, the office of the black male.
Student Achievement.
Yeah, I'm on their email blast. So do you have something that you're sending out with some of these things that you're doing, like a newsletter or whatever for your department, given that it's such an important issue?
Not yet. Right now, I'm a department of 1, but we're building. So I see in the next, so summer will be, some people think summer is the downtime, but it's actually kind of go time for us. So as our principals are replenishing themselves in the month of July, we're spending that time in central office planning. So the plan is to have the website up and running, as well as being more proactive in reaching out to communications, so that they can blast that on the webpage, so that families can know, hey, we've got these great things going with our students, and just getting the word out.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Yeah, I think that's so important too, because then we can all, as parents, advocate for the great work that you're doing there. So you touched on the charter schools. So full disclosure, so I was one of those parents. I moved my now 5th grader who's back at field because loves the neighborhood school, but I did move her to a charter school for a year in 4th grade, and that was very interesting. I mean, lots of pros and cons with that. Like you mentioned, the busing out of the neighborhood and that kind of thing, but for a variety of reasons, we did move her. So you kind of touched on that, and that was one of the questions that we wanted to talk to you all about, is that what are you as a district, what is your thought process? How are you all addressing? Are you talking to the charter schools, especially in North Minneapolis, where they're really catering to North Minneapolis families, and really marketing that, hey, we can fill the gap that you're not getting from the district. So give us a little insight into some of those conversations that you all are having as a team, and what you're doing to address that.
Well, right now, I know we're in a pilot of conducting parent exit surveys for parents who have left NPS to find out why. And there's preliminary data, and I actually was asking ahead of time, like, do we have enough to be able to share? And we're not at a point where we can share it publicly yet, but because it's still in a pilot. Mm-hmm. But the plan is, and what they have been doing, some people in our department as well as the Family Engagement Office, is calling parents to find out, you've left Minneapolis, you know, would you be willing to share with us your reason why? And it can range from, he said, things that are offered at a charter school that may not be offered at NPS. It could have to do with transportation. It could have to do with certain programming. Again, I talked about it earlier. There are parents who might say, I want to go to a school where my kid can bring their whole self through the door, where they can go to a place where they're affirmed. And so if that is the reasoning, then we in Minneapolis have work to do in our schools so that parents don't have to make the choice to say, I'm sending my child to this school because they can be affirmed when they walk in, they feel welcome. Again, as a parent, to me, customer service is number one. So if we're finding out from parents that they may not feel as welcome, then that's problematic, right? So that's something that we could work on. So we're in that preliminary of collecting that data so that we can then look at where are the themes and what are areas that we can work on directly at central office, and then how do we communicate with our schools? Because it also comes down to climate and thinking about where you feel most connected. And again, as a parent, there was an opportunity that I had to send my child to a school that was within our neighborhood that I actually went to as a young child. It was a private school, and I wanted him to go there because I knew some of the teachers that were there. But I also knew if I sent him there, I was going to give up the opportunity for him to get special ed services on site. And I didn't want him to lose a chunk of his school day being transported from one building to the other. So I also know if a parent is choosing a charter school and they have their child is receiving services of some type, you possibly give up that opportunity for your child to have a seamless school day. They might have to leave at 9 and come back at 10:30. So that was a choice that I wasn't willing to make, but I also understand that there are parents that do that because they're getting something else.
Well, that's a good transition, because that was one of the last points specifically for you, Candace, and then we'll take questions and then whatever else you too want to share for the audience to know. But so there is that balance, right, of the different needs for such a diverse body of students. So how do you, as a district, between, like, I've met with the gifted and talented team over there, and then a parent today was talking about the need for more ethnic curriculum at the high school level. So how do you all work as a team at the district office to address all those various needs and prioritizing too? Must be a real challenge.
And I'm looking at Eric Moore because we spent the morning mapping out our professional development plan, because that's another big area. Is if we're going to institute change, we have to start with the adults. And as we're looking at our equity professional development plan, our equity PD plan, we're looking at we're looking at the plan for impacting adults at the personal level. This past year, I had the privilege of working with, I think it was maybe 30 plus equity leads. Each building had an equity lead identified, and they spent 3 professional development sessions with us, so 2 hours at a time. And then we asked if there were some equity leads that were willing to continue the cohort so they could go deeper in their learning. Wanting to start with our equity leads because they are in the building, so they have a touch point that's we're running out of words. They have a much far-reaching touch than we do at central office. So if we start with our equity leads, they are often classroom teachers as well, or leads in the building. So they can start those conversations in-house. And then we're looking at, for teachers, what professional development can be offered on-site. There's some administrators that are reaching out and asking for PD on-site the first couple days of next week, as well as looking at what they can do in August when their staff comes back. So when I think about what change needs to happen, systemic racism has existed for such a long time, and we are a product of that system. So any of us that went through the education system, that graduated, and those of us who went back to the system to become a teacher or work in central office, we are a part of that system because we came up through it. And it makes it harder to break a system that you were a part of, right? Because the rules of engagement are hidden. And it's not until you start to bring more people to the table to get a different perspective to say, what is it going to take to break the system? It's going to take people. People who create policies, people who institute policies to change. And so we're starting with adults who will then, it would inform not only what you believe about students and yourselves and what skin that you're in, but how you impact those around you, and then ultimately impact the students. I hope I answered.
Yeah, no, that's good. So and we'll talk more at the end, and then we also have straight ahead there a place for people to put Post-it notes of questions, suggestions, and things that we can as a community do after this discussion, how we can continue it too. So we can do some follow-up at the end from both of you. So before we move on to Ms. Jenkins, is there anything else that you feel like you want the audience to know? And then again, we can come back and with questions too. But anything else you'd like to say?
I'm going to practice restraint because my family's last name is Logan, and we can talk all day. So I'm going to practice restraint, and I'm going to tag it off. But
all right.
Thank you.
So we will move on to Ms. Jenkins. So when we were preparing for this night, we just the emails and the conversations that we had as a team were just really interesting. And I know I said more than once or twice that I really feel like the diversity and integration in the schools, it needs to be, business, council, job creation. It can't just fall on, the parents and the students in the school. So I just really appreciate Ms. Jenkins being here, because I think that although we know that the mayor and the city council don't have accountability for the district, definitely the policies and things that you were talking about there affect it. So thank you for being here. So we just want to talk about housing because we know that's such a big part of the neighborhood and the development and what's happening with affordable housing. So Ms. Jenkins, if you can just give us an idea, or actually let me just talk about a little history here. I'm looking at my team's notes, so let me not skip over this. So in our immediate neighborhood near Field School, we have a rich history of affordable integrated housing with the Tilson built homes, and I think there's one of the boards here that talks about that. The nation's first integrated affordable housing program in the mid-1950s, supported by FHA funding, and we've got the excellent overview of the history here. So now as we're seeing housing prices skyrocket in Minneapolis, and knowing that that is something that is really top of mind, if you can just give us an idea, what's happening with the city council and the kind of discussions that you're having with affordable housing. We know that the mayor really ran on that as far as his campaign promises. So can you give us some insight into that? Would be great.
Wow. Well, thank you. And I just want to say how honored I am to be here tonight. Thank you for including me in this discussion, and thank you to all of the organizers who have been really working hard to put this together. And I know that it is a continuation of a conversation that started last year on this topic, and really it's an important context for us to have this conversation and to see the history of this community and Hale and Field schools. And so I'm really deeply honored. I do want to say thank you to everybody who supported me and said, way to go, congratulations, maybe said a prayer for me. I'm deeply grateful for you and really proud to serve the 8th Ward as the council member. And you know, our campaign was really talking about leadership and equity, right? And so we were able to go into the work of the council and get elected vice president. So I'm really, really proud of that. And I think that helps to bring more light to the issues that I'm trying to lift up. And so one of my roles as the vice president means that I chair our committee of the whole, and as a part of chairing that, I am the chair of the Racial Equity Subcommittee, which is the first time in the history of Minneapolis that we have had a racial equity committee on the city council. We instituted the Office of Race and Equity, which again was a Minneapolis first, and I want to make sure that I acknowledge and give full credit to my predecessor in this role, Elizabeth Glidden, who instituted the Office of Race and Equity and created sort of enabling legislation, if you will, to make that work possible. And so that means that at the city, we are trying to take a holistic approach and look at everything that happens, all the decisions that get made, all of the dollars that we spend. Are we spending those dollars? Are we making these decisions with not only a mind towards not doing harm to people, but sometimes we make policies that have unintentional impacts and effects. And we want to make sure that we're not creating harm for people, more harm for people, but also we want to make sure that the policies, the decisions that we make are equitable. And that means that everybody has to have an equal opportunity to participate in our full culture and society. With respect to housing, the kinds of conversations that we are having on the city council, I mean, pretty much not a day goes by when we're not discussing housing. Affordable housing is a major crisis in every city in the United States. It's being exacerbated by a number of factors, but I think that primarily, as Candace talked about in her earlier comments, primarily Black and brown people are being significantly impacted by this challenge. And I would even go further to say that, you know, if somebody really did the studies on who is having the most challenges, it's women of color. Black and brown moms that are trying to raise families and do not have access to safe and affordable housing. And so it's a major conversation on the city council. The mayor has hinted that he is seeking to spend $50 million on affordable housing this year, or in the next coming year in this budget. And I do believe that budgets are our values, right? Budgets speak to what we value most in our culture and society. And so, you know, I certainly believe that we need and we must commit more investment into affordable housing. $50 million is going to be very challenging to realize, given all of the other constraints that are on city budgets. And so I think we're going to have to be really creative and really focused. But I think one of the programs that has been being discussed, and I think that can really, have resonance in this particular conversation, is targeting housing resources to students who are experiencing homelessness and helping their families find stable housing, subsidize that housing, because I know as you know, you guys as educators and as parents, and I'm certainly a parent as well, but when you move around to multiple schools in any given school year, or every other school year, it does have impacts on your ability to fully engage, to fully realize your fullest potential. And so if we can identify those young people and then disrupt that cycle of homelessness, we think that young people will have better outcomes, families will have more stable and supportive housing, surround those families with the supports to ensure that they can keep that safe and secure housing. So those are some of the kinds of solutions that people are talking about. As folks may be aware of, we are working on what we're calling the 2040 Comprehensive Plan for the city of Minneapolis. And it's not necessarily unique to the city of Minneapolis, and it's certainly not something that we just decided to do. It's a process that happens every 10 years. Every city in the state of Minnesota needs to develop a land use plan, a plan really that historically has been only about where housing goes, where businesses go, what roads and transportation options. But this year in Minneapolis, and I think many of the cities, surrounding cities in the metro area, are really thinking more deeply and more broadly about what kind of community do we want to live in? Who do we want to benefit from living in this community? And so looking around this room and seeing all of the projects that the young people are doing, it's really incredible, because those projects that the redlining, the Tilson-built homes, the Lena O. Smith and the work that she was doing as the first black attorney in the state of Minnesota, looking at that history and having that inform the plan that we are trying to move forward in the city. And really, I'm hoping that you all can go and take a look at this plan and give us your best ideas. There is about 6 weeks left before comment period ends. But we really want to have your best thoughts, your best thinking. It is going to have, this plan will have a very broad impact on what our city looks like in the future. Somebody tried to scare me and say, you and your colleagues are going to be deciding on who gets to live in Minneapolis for the next 100 years.
Wow.
I think that may be a little bit hyperbolic, but
Well, and I had
it's a reality, though. I mean, I think it is going to be significant that we really get this right this time around. And so hopefully you guys can get engaged and help us figure some of this stuff out.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, because I remember reading about the 2040, and that this is the first time that I've heard it talked about again. And so are you going to be having like open discussions to take comments, or has that already happened and now it's just online for us to go and?
Yes, so great. So there have been open discussions that have been hosted throughout the city throughout the month of May. And I want to acknowledge that the plan has been being developed for the past 2.5 years.
Okay.
So since 2016. And there have been literally hundreds of conversations and inputs and different art activities and forums for people to inform the plan.
Okay.
And so now that the plan has been created in its draft form, we are seeking comments on the plan. And that will, so there were open houses all throughout the month of May.
Okay.
And so those have completed, but now you can go online and comment on the plan. I will be personally hosting another forum on June 22nd.
June 22nd.
And, you know, I have a weekly newsletter that we send out, and so we send it out to all the neighborhood organizations and neighbors who sign up to be receiving this information, and it'll be there, but we're going to have people from community planning and economic development there,
Nice.
as well as advocates in the community, as well as people who are critical of the plan, and in particular, Gary Cunningham, who sits on the Metropolitan Council, is challenging us to really make this plan more equitable, in his opinion, and I think that's a fair opinion. But we're going to be hosting that conversation on June 22nd. Some of you may remember, because I'm seeing some very familiar faces in the audience, that Elizabeth used to host a community gathering called Early Mornings with Elizabeth. And I will be hosting Afternoons with Andrea.
That's great.
So it'll be a noontime discussion at the Friendship Store on 38th and 3rd Avenue. They have a really nice community space, and so we'll be there having that conversation. Like I said, there'll be folks there. We'll have copies of the plan, and hopefully we'll have some great conversation around what is happening. One other thing I want to mention, and because you asked about what conversations are happening in City Hall.
Yeah, more like crazy creative ideas you all are coming up
Right, exactly. So one of my first days in office in January, I got an email from an organization called Policy Link, which is a really amazing policy think tank out of Oakland, California, that is working on just for the past 35 years, I believe, how to create more equitable communities, particularly for communities of color. And they were sponsoring a 10-city policy cohort to look at and to develop anti-displacement issues for your own particular city, but working with other cities to really think creatively and broadly about these ideas. And I thought to myself, man, I want to be a part of this cohort, right? And so we started right away putting together an application and a team. You need this really big team to apply, and it has to have some government people, but it also has to have some nonprofit people and some community folks. And so we mapped it all out, and we were getting ready to put our application together, and I called over to the Office of Community Planning and Economic Development because I would need their support. And they were like, oh yeah, we're already applying for that program. And so I was able to add my name to the application, and consequently, we were selected to be in this 10-city cohort with cities like Austin, Texas, and Seattle, Washington, Portland, Oregon, Milwaukee, and a number of other cities, to really think about how do we create affordable, mixed income communities that people can live, thrive, be healthy, but also not displacing the people who have been in these communities, you know, through the storm, if you will, through the epidemics and the opioids and the racism and all of the things. How do we create communities where everybody can be a part of that and everybody can thrive? So I'm really proud that we were able to be connected to this project. We are working in collaboration with the City of St. Paul, with Hope Communities, which is a housing project, with CURA, the Center for Urban Research and Regional Affairs, at the University of Minnesota, who has been doing a lot of research around affordable housing, as well as working with Urban Homeworks is a part of our cohort as well. So we have a really amazing team. I'm really hoping for some brilliant, creative ideas to come from this. One crazy idea that I have for housing that I've been kind of floating around is that many people have heard about the fourplex explosion, right? People are familiar a little bit with this conversation. Well, the comprehensive plan has been sort of reduced, and it's, I don't know, 189 pages, but people have reduced it to basically fourplexes everywhere, and expressing concern that the city is going to tear down all the city single-family homes and build fourplexes. I can guarantee you that will not happen. That is not going to happen for a whole host of reasons, but primarily because I would not let something like that go down. That being said, I grew up in Chicago, and you know, my family was a part of the great northern migration of people who you know, migrated from the Jim Crow, vicious, murderous, oppressive, apartheid South to try to seek better opportunities in the North. And you know, one of the first family members to move to Chicago was a great aunt, her name was Aunt Ella, and she bought like a 3-story building. Here in Minnesota we call them triplexes, but in Chicago they call them 3 stories. So she bought a 3-story building and then had like a tenement house, right? And she would have spaces for family members to be able to move to Chicago, and other people would rent, and that was pretty common. But then as my family all began to come to Chicago, they all bought 2 stories or 3 stories, and all of my life growing up, all of my aunts and uncles and great aunts and uncles, they all had like apartment buildings, and family lived there.
A multi-generational.
Right,
Yeah.
multi-generational, multi-family, all in the same family. So for 5 generations, that's how my family has really moved into probably what I would call the working middle class. But it is a way, it's not a way to get rich, but it is a way to build wealth.
Yeah, stability.
And to have housing stability within your family. And so I will say that I am a proponent of us loosening our zoning policies, because right now the majority of the city of Minneapolis, you can only build single-family houses. And we need to have space for more than just single-family houses. 70% of our zoning is residential 1, or R1 is what they call it.
Didn't know that.
And, you know, that restricts how many people can live here. And so I think we do need to have that, and when opportunities arise to build multi-family housing, then we should be able to do that without seeking a zoning variance and having, you know, everybody on the block come out and, you know, express their opinion about where people can live. And so I am a proponent of that, but my crazy idea around that is that that should be a program much like what we do with single-family home ownership programs. We incentivize first-time home buyers. We should incentivize first-time multi-family home buyers, so that we ensure that developers don't take over those properties and that they are owner-occupied, and that we can begin and target it towards communities of color so that we can begin to create and build wealth within our own communities. That strengthens communities, that strengthens families. I think that strengthens the schools around us, the parks around us, all of the things that make it great to live in a neighborhood. So it's kind of I think, a bit of a crazy idea.
Doesn't sound like it to me.
It sounds like common sense, but nothing like this has ever been done before, and I think it's going to be a heavy lift, but I'm committed and determined to make it happen.
Well, those are some just great insights. Thank you so much. I learned a ton just listening to you both. So I'm not going to do any follow-up questions myself, because I want to really be respectful of everybody's time, and we have a great audience here. So I will open up to the audience to ask our panelists questions. You know, we do, not to put the educators and other people on the spot, but, you know, anybody else that wants to, you know, add or make any suggestions, feel free. And I think we have Lorene that's helping with questions from the audience.
Families of color to leave the district, and the district did not see that as a conflict of interest. How does that make you feel?
We're just gonna go there.
We're gonna go there. Okay. Let's go there.
Hey, we're there. So I heard about it at the same time probably the public heard about it. So one thing I can say is, being in a central office building, I often see people that I don't really know who they are. So I'm that person, I'm gonna say hi to everybody, just because it doesn't cost to say anything. It doesn't cost to say hi. So I had heard the name but couldn't match a name with a face. And so then when I heard about the story, one of the questions that I had was, so how is that? I mean, Like in all honesty, I don't really know him as a person, but I too would have the question about if what is in the articles. I'm gonna be very mindful, because I also want to be responsible about what I'm saying, right? So if in the article, it is what the article stated was that he has what I call a side gig, where my understanding of it was the parents may ask, where's the best place for my child to be, and he would be kind of like a consultant in that. If that is the case and it is moving kids away from MPS, then my question would be, what information are you finding out from families that they are leaving MPS that we can do right by them before they leave, right? So yes, I would have some questions about, is that really cool that you're working in a place where then you might also be advising parents to choose somewhere else? Because if that's the case, then what about MPS can we improve? Can we get some feedback on that? Will be my question. Tell us where we're messing up so that we can make changes, so that we can get parents back. And once we make those changes, find those parents who left and say, hey, we fixed what you said was broken. Are you willing to give us another chance, right? Because we're always competing for kids. And so if it's a matter of if that child is going to get what they need in that other district, I would be remiss if I said stay in MPS even though we're not meeting your needs. If that's a parent who's saying, I only get, like you and I were saying, we don't have test babies. We got one kid, I got one kid, you have two, right? From our conversation. So there's no experimenting being done on my kid. If I realize that my child is not getting their needs met, I'm going to take them where they need to go. Fortunately, I have access to information because I'm a part of the education system. I have access to information. I have access to a vehicle. I have access to a schedule and a network or a village that allows me to drive my child to the school where he's going to have his needs met. But the question is, what about the families who don't have access to information? Mm-hmm. They love their child just as much as I love mine. The only thing that separates us is access to information and resources. So how can we then become an ally with families who might feel disenfranchised and they go where they feel like they're going to get their needs met? I want them to be happy. But if we can change and meet their needs here, we need to do the accommodating. So I would say that's on us. We are a public institution. We educate everybody. So if we are not doing right by children, we need that feedback, whether it's at the building level, central office level, so that we can, because we're in the business of impacting students and families. So I hope was that acceptable or no? Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Thank you. Another question?
I'm wondering if we know of communities that have really done a good job at integrating schools, neighborhood schools. What are the lessons we can learn from those experiences? If there are good examples of that, and if there are communities that have stumbled, and what can we learn from them? So your colleagues in other districts across the country or in other parts of Minnesota, what can we hold up as a way to proceed and have successful, diverse schools?
I'm guessing that's to me, right? Okay. So as Andrea shared when she was discussing housing and how our housing issue here is not isolated to Minneapolis or St. Paul. It's across the country. So when housing is segregated, schools are segregated. When we have black and brown families that are disenfranchised and they're living multiple families in a home because they cannot find affordable housing or don't have access to information, they're going to send their child, if we're talking about resources now, they may send their child to the school closest to where they are. And if the neighborhood is segregated, then the school will be. And I'm answering in that way because I don't know, and I would defer to Eric to find out if he knows of any. In my travels, so I do have to say that I also lead professional development, so I get the opportunity to go to other states, New York, actually Harlem, New York, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Cambridge, Massachusetts, Greensboro, North Carolina, Great Neck, New York. I'm trying to think of the different places I've gone to. One of the questions I ask is about their school and how integrated they are. And interesting and sadly, they're not. So the question is, if we have an integrated setting, can we say that those are public schools that are integrated? Sometimes those schools that are maybe more integrated might be more exclusive schools, right? But I'd also ask us to think about, can we also point to schools where the majority of the population is black and brown and they're excelling, right? So I'm not knocking integration, because I shouldn't be in this role if I am. That's part of my title. But I also don't want us to get away from, we don't look at some of our schools that are not integrated. We have a lot of predominantly white schools in Minneapolis, right? And so we have some black and brown children in that school, but it's like this. They're sprinkled. So if we're looking at integrated schools, as I said earlier, are we willing to be brave enough to then bus our white children to predominantly black schools to integrate them? And if not, what will it take? Is it programming? Is it perceived thoughts of safety? Let's be real. Is it programming, perceived thoughts of safety? Is it access to resources? Is it because I'm not familiar? Because I think of some of our schools that are in predominantly white neighborhoods, and the school doesn't look like the neighborhood. So the parents living in that neighborhood are sending their children not to the school across the street, but across town, because they have resources, they have access. So those are the questions. If we're talking integration, let's get real dirty with it. Equity is dirty and it's messy. If it wasn't messy, we're not changing the system. So everybody needs to be uncomfortable. We talk about if people are uncomfortable, then we're moving some things. We're doing some equity work. If everybody's comfortable, we're maintaining status quo.
Well, I would just...
Could I just add a little bit to that response? You know, because I think the way we fund our schools is inherently problematic. It's really tied to our property taxes. And so, like you said, and I'm just sort of highlighting it a little bit more, is that, you know, if you live in a low-income community, then the amount of property taxes that goes to that school is going to be significantly less than a higher earning community. And consequently, the schools and the services in that community are going to reflect that. And so, as a society, we have to make a decision and a choice as to whether or not we want to fully educate everybody. And I really believe that it's a business decision that people have to be able to make. We live right now, Minneapolis and Minnesota, the state is expected to have like a 60,000 person job shortage within the next 5 years. And those numbers actually are probably pretty low. And so where is our workforce going to come from? How are we going to educate these young people? And the census tells us that it is most likely going to be black and brown people who are increasing in population. And if we are not fully educating all of these young people, then you know, we're not going to be able to meet our needs as a society in terms of workforce, leadership, all of the goods and services that we need in our communities. We're not going to be able to meet those needs without a well-trained and prepared workforce. So it's a business case as much as it is you know, an equity conversation, which, you know, I'm very, deeply believe in and interested and willing to have that conversation. But, you know, I think that we have to decide, can we fund schools without it being tied directly to property taxes? And I think that those would be communities where you would see much better, thriving, integrated schools.
Thank you, that's a good question. I would just say on a side note, following up of communities and cities that I'm like, just me personally are seeing them do some significant things. And so my sister is a single black mom that moved to San Diego. And when she first moved there, I was like, I really, like, it must be so expensive, and you're single, and how's that gonna work? But and I don't know, I haven't studied it, but the feedback she's consistently giving us, I'll just throw it out there to you too if you're looking for examples, is that they seem to be doing really well as far as having mixed housing, intergenerational, the schools out there. It's just been really interesting, the feedback that she's giving me about some of the things that they're doing out there. So throwing San Diego out there is maybe one we should look at.
Can't help myself. This is such an interesting conversation. There's been studies, and I've been looking at integration for close to 20 years. So there's studies that actually say that the average person, if moving from one school to the next, is about 15 to 20 minutes is what a parent is willing to, given a really strong program, is willing to travel additionally on the bus away from their neighborhood. So when you look at our community, going back to the point that was mentioned about housing, and you look at our school district, which we are one of the most segregated school districts in the United States, particularly when you look at North Minneapolis, it really matters if you're truly wanting to achieve integration, bodies to bodies, next to bodies, where those magnet schools are located, right? And so that's something that you really need to pay attention to. So as we're partnering with the city on the housing conversation, I think there's some part of our district-wide assessment is really taking a look at where are magnet schools, what are the pathways, because you need to have coherent pathways for our families from kindergarten all the way to high school. What are the programming? We know that different communities value different types of programming. So if you're wanting to move certain families, then you need to attract that. And so you have to do that type of research. But that's part of the district-wide assessment where we really need to engage our families and communities. And as Candace mentioned, you know, there is a tension because what is the tipping point for families? What I typically see when we talk about integration is when a school tips, so it becomes 60%, right? Students of color, you start seeing white flight from those locations. Okay, so we have to talk about what does integration look like, and typically from the research, what you see as well is when you want to bring families back in, you typically see in a racially isolated school, middle-income families of color come back first. So then you see a decrease in the concentration of poverty. In our district, about 90% of African American, American Indian students qualify for free and reduced lunch. Okay, so you have concentration of race and poverty. So you bring back your middle-income families, many with which are attending charters. Right? So our communities are integrated in many cases by income now. And then you start seeing more white families move in when you decrease the concentration of poverty, because everyone's looking at the other piece, which is the academic achievement, right? And so it's really challenging to get families to move into a school where the proficiency on a standardized test is 25%. Okay, so that's the other piece, is that you have to look at the academic achievement, it's the programming, it's the location, and so these are conversations we really want our schools to work. We really need to have deeper conversations about what we're trying to do. But that's just from the national research. It's very rare that it works because we have segregated communities. And so in the case of San Diego, you know, I would probably say you probably are having more opportunities of income integration as well as racial integration, and then you're able to see some things move. Now, I've seen some locations where you're investing an additional $1 million and every student's getting a laptop computer or every student has to get something significantly different. And you think of years past, we had Sumatech in North Minneapolis, and we had students move. But this program has to be significantly different for families that are willing to move longer, travel longer than the 15 to 20 minutes. So one of the things that we do is we don't have a large budget for magnet school programming. So we spend the majority of our dollars on transportation. Right? And the question is, do you want to spend $4.6 million busing students, or do you want to invest that in schools, right? And have incredible programs and incredible opportunities for students to do things phenomenally in terms of their academic achievement and opportunities, and then have families choose to move to those schools. So there's different philosophies, and I think this is something that we're going to have to engage in over the next year and a half in terms of our values.
And I would also say too, is we're looking at the movement too, and the city studying the 2040, is that companies and the recruiting that they do, that the city is able to, especially like, and we know like the B schools and the General Mills and a lot of the people that they recruit, the city needs to be saying, move here, come here, you don't have to live in Golden Valley by General Mills, you can commute, it's not that bad. So I think some of that marketing and some of that communication needs to happen too.
The wording of this question, but is the goal strictly integration, or is the goal to increase test scores through integration? And then my secondary question to that would be, what are the mechanics by which integration improves test scores? Thank you.
So one of the goals of the achievement and integration, just even by the name, is we want to increase student achievement. So they're naming the things that are the reality. We have low student achievement, and we also have very segregated schools. And I would say it's Minneapolis being the district that has the most in the state. I think the second highest district is Osseo, if I remember correctly. And so, so the goal is twofold. We want to increase achievement. We also want to increase integration. As one principal asked me at the beginning of the year when their school received part of their allocation, she goes, she says, I'm conflicted with taking this money because it makes it, I don't want it to look like that I'm taking money to make my school look attractive to white families in the name of integration. And so my response to her was, I hear what you're saying, but I'm going to ask you to look at it from this side. You're receiving integration dollars that were identified specifically for your site to increase the achievement of the students in front of you right now. Whether it's programming, access to programming, because you could spend your dollars on increasing the number of, say you have telescope math, and you recognize that you have a number of students that qualify to be in that advanced math, but you don't have the staff for it. So you use your integration dollars to have a position created for a staff person to then be able to provide that access to the students who otherwise they might not get it. And so if that is the case, and you're looking at achievement, if you wanted to then have your school partner with another non-racially identifiable school in Minneapolis, because we don't do enough of that, that could be a shared learning activity that the students have together. There's your integrated learning opportunity. So that we're not saying we're only working on integration and hoping to impact achievement. Like, our job is to impact the students in front of us in our building. And we can provide integrated learning opportunities by partnering with other schools. Also, if you become a school, as Eric was sharing, you're knocking it out the park. The kids love being in school. They feel like they're a part of the community. You have staff that are doing the tough work of the introspective. I'm examining my practice. I'm examining my beliefs. I'm looking at how I can increase the rigor in my classroom. My students are engaged. My disengagement or misbehavior is down, and we are really rocking and rolling. We're grooving. And we get 2 or 3 years under our belt, and our achievement starts to go up. And parents are looking at which schools have the high proficiency. You might start getting more parents that don't look like the kids right now choosing your school, to Eric's point. But we don't necessarily wait for that. We have kids right now that need to be educated. So I'd say, again, it's twofold. We start with achievement, and we can create those integrated opportunities.
Mr. Andrews is going to kind of end our question time. Thank you again, everybody, for coming. Thank you to our honorable panelists, and I will hand it over to Mr. Andrews, and he would like to make a statement.
Thank you very much. One of the individuals that is responsible for me being here, you mind if I stand over here? That's my education portion, is Dr. Lowry Johnson. And I came in 1969 to Minneapolis from Mobile, Alabama, particularly from Montgomery, Alabama, where I thought maybe that I could enter the University of Alabama, but George Wallace said no. So I came here from the Job Corps Center in the Shawameca National Forest, scared to death that something gonna happen to me and my wife. But to answer the question, I think here, when you say, do you know of any schools that are successful? And I'm being partial with it because I was here. And I would say the school that you're sitting in was very successful with that. Before I came over, I understood that they were interviewing teachers who were here when this was all black school. Hale School that you see up there, basically all white, and asked them if they wanted to stay here if we integrate the school. The superintendent, we got Dr. Johnson, who was a principal at that time, and others, and started discussing that with them. So what we did was to ask the teachers who were here, do you really want to be a part of this? If not, maybe we could, and I don't know if they did or not, find you a job at another school that's not going to do this, because we're thinking about integrating Field and Hale. Now, don't want to fool you at all, or fool myself. It wasn't easy to do, because Hale didn't want to give up what they had, and I don't know if Field wanted to give up what they had, but they were willing to have a try at it. And when you talk about economics and about taxes and et cetera, if you live across 42nd and Portland, you're kind of, especially if you're black, in a pretty good tax area. If you lived over on 54th and 12th, which where Hale School is located now, you were in a higher tax area. But both areas was pretty good economically. A number of the teachers and principals were educated in that area, and they did that. So we finally got that settled with what? Moving those teachers who didn't want to be here, moving those who didn't want to be at Hale School. And what we did was, this was a K-6. And some of those who are in here who was part of it, there may be some parents in there can correct me if I'm wrong. And Hale School was a K-6. What we did was we brought we sent the K-3s here over to Hale School. That kind of brought automatically what? Integration. Because if you send the K-3s here over to Hale School, the K-3s here are mostly what? Black. So we integrate, and we sent the 4-6 from Hale School over here. Now they had to kind of agree with that, and we had some fussing, and we had da-da-da-da-da-da. But they did finally get to that. Did it take a while? Yes. It didn't happen instantly. And when people saw the success of the two schools, it leaped. For an example, I was teaching in my 6th grade class, which is around the corner here right now, and someone from out east came and brought the camera in and to shine it on me to see if this was really working. Integration didn't work too well in Boston. Took a long time for them to put them on the bus, a lot of fighting to do that. So to make it real short, and I don't want to take too much of the time, yes, it can work. But it won't work unless you make it work. And it won't work if you're here, excuse the expression, it's part of me, praise the Lord, and you don't want to be. And so that's why we ask teachers, do you want to do this? If not, we'll try to find you another school in the area. So I had a lot of experience with that. I came right out of the 60s. I knew about Dr. Martin Luther King. I knew about the marching. And so what did I have to bring to Minnesota? I could bring that portion of integration there. And I am just so proud of a number of the teachers who are here and the teachers who have gone on has been extremely successful. One other thing is, and I'm not suggesting that this has to happen, is that a number of us who taught here lived here. I lived around the corner on 4521 Portland Avenue. This is about 46. So I knew the parents, I saw them, I taught in the day, I coached in the evening, football, basketball, all of it. So we got to know each other extremely well. Now, you say, oh, Mike, you gotta be nuts. That's not gonna happen now. But we're just telling you, the place that you are sitting in was extremely successful. And as a result, we have this tonight.
Thank you. That is a great way to end our night. Thank you so much, Mr. Andrews.
Terry asked me if I would share a poem. Some of you may or may not know that I am a poet and a writer and performance artist, and so I'm always happy to get a microphone so I can put some words in the air. The piece I thought I would read tonight, though, is called Solstice Dreams. We're in the month of June, and we're moving towards the summer solstice, which marks the equinox, the equal half of the year when the day is as long as the night. And so it's called Solstice Dreams. He has 2 fingers resting gingerly upon his lips, contemplating the balance in the universe. There is a connection between what happens in the material world and what happens in the spiritual world. If you are on the side of angels, your view is obstructed by the glitter. If you are on the side of evil, your perspective will be overshadowed by obscurity either way. You will find this landscape absurd. Where can you find the balance? She takes 2 fingers and places them over her third eye and begins to meditate. Her mind goes blank. She eases gently into a liminal space. Even in the United States of America, we are balanced by a legislative branch and a judicial branch. If either takes control, society becomes problematic. And if you don't believe me, just turn on CNN or MSNBC. He flexes his thumbs and rests them against his temples. It is the middle of the day and night. 12 hours on each side. There is a fullness in the moon tonight. In his mind's eye, it is brighter than the sun. A paradox in the grandest sense of the word. In the Bible, we read, where there is no vision, the people shall perish. To move forward with a vision is to move forward with a plan. We must follow a reoccurring star that appears to remind us of this equinox, to recalibrate our personal ecology, detoxify our bodies and our collective thinking, She rubs her eyes with 2 forefingers, emerges from her meditative state, inhales deeply, exhales at the same rate. In an instant, she is reconnected to self, which just might mean the entire world. Thank you very much. Thank you. Enjoy the band.